It's really wonderful to see you here on a Friday afternoon. I know you are as excited as I am for our guest today, Dr. Akasha Hull. I should introduce myself before I start with her exciting bio. My name is Dr. Rachel Afi Quinn, and I am a professor in women's gender and sexuality studies and also comparative cultural studies here. I see some of my students in the audience. This sort of culminates some of a big push of programming we've had going on this month. I hope you will pick up a calendar of events so you can see what else we're doing, where we try to bring together students, faculty, and community members to engage in conversations about gender studies. We're very pleased to have Dr. Hull with us today in a conversation about her work, because so many of us here know how influential her work has been to the feminist movement and to arts and culture of women of color in the United States and more broadly. Dr. Akasha Hull is a poet, literary critic, fiction writer, academic activist, professor, and public lecturer. Her work focuses on the social and textual representation of U.S. women. She's taught at the University of Delaware, the University of the West Indies in Kingston, Jamaica, and the University of California at Santa Cruz. So her text, which we're selling in the back, one of her publications, I encourage you to pick up a copy as it's been republished, recognizing how influential it's been. The full title, All the Women Are White, All the Blacks Are Men, But Some of Us Are Brave, is a book that she co-edited in the late 70s and was published in 1982, that she co-edited with Patricia Bell Scott and Barbara Smith, and it opened up the field of Black women's studies. It's recently been republished by Feminist Press. Also, her work, Color, Sex, and Poetry, brought attention to women poets of the Harlem Renaissance and revealed for the first time lesbian themes in their lives and work. So you might be familiar with that text, in which she incorporates interviews with writers such as Toni Cade Bambara, Alice Walker, and Sonia Sanchez. Her book Soul Talk explores how non-traditional spirituality was a crucial ingredient in the explosive renaissance of Black women's literature during the 1980s and 90s. So today she's going to speak about her foundational texts, Some of Us Are Brave, and also her novel NEICY from 2012. And I guess I'll speak. I've been going through the biography, and her visit has pushed me to go back and look at these works that I came across both in high school and then in college and then as a graduate student, and think about how the women who have come before that have influenced and made it possible for me to be in this space as a new faculty member. So that's one of the reasons why it's such an honor for me to be here. I think you see that conveyed in the afterword that Brittany Cooper has written in the new published text, but it really can't stress enough, as we've talked about with my students in the classroom, what it means to build a critical mass and theorize one's life experience, not only to help understand your world, but also to make space for a diversity of experiences and identities, in the communities that we live in and in the academic community that some of us spend so much time in, and are trying very hard to make this space a space that more people feel comfortable joining and participating in. So without further ado, I welcome and introduce to you Dr. Akasha Hull.
I'm short, but not that short. Okay, we had this so beautifully positioned. Is this good? Is that gonna work? Okay, all right. I love seeing all of you here, and I love being here myself, beautiful women here in Houston, just wonderful feminist things going on, good networks, and everybody has treated me royally. So I am so happy to be here for this event, and also on tomorrow, I'll be having a conversation for the Finding Our Way photographic exhibit, and there's material about that here. So I'm here for 2 full days, and very, very happy to be here. I haven't given this particular talk that I'm going to be doing today. I called it Crafting Feminisms. And what I'm trying to get at is this: how, in order to do good feminist work, we need to pay attention to not only our theory and ideas, but also to our craft and our creativity. You know how when people are teaching you how to write and how to think and how to put out what you're writing, they tend to talk about that dichotomy of form and structure, ideas and presentation, form and content, what you say, how you see it, the message and the medium. Now, that's putting it in a very dichotomous, binary way, because when you are on fire with an idea, somewhere in you, you're always also, even if not consciously, thinking about how to put it in words or how to put it in form, and then how are you going to be able to communicate that to somebody else. So they actually are a holistic thing. But in order to talk about it, I think we do talk about it by breaking it up, and that is useful because it focuses your attention on one part of the process or the other. And what I'm saying works for anything. I mean, no matter what your work is or what your creativity is, that's kind of how it goes. But what made me begin to think about this and want to talk about it is all the women are white, all the blacks are men, but some of us are Black women studies, because it is just recently republished, and I've done some talks on that. And it got me to thinking about why is it that after 33 years, that book is still so important and so useful for so many people. You know, at this point, we thought, well, you know, it's archival history. But I myself was just totally amazed that when I picked it up, I was going like, yeah, right. Still, still relevant, still a problem. No, we haven't done that yet. Yeah, no, we can still keep that on the agenda, and so forth. And it's like, what is it about it? And I realized that it had a lot to do with what it was we who are the editors, who were the editors and contributors, it had a lot to do with what motivated us, what our passions were, and how we were trying to pull together what we were doing. On the one hand, of course, we were making an intervention in Black women being left out. You know, Black women were not in women's studies, Black women were not in Black studies. So we were making that intervention. And we were also really fired with the desire to do what we consider true feminist work. And I say that true, you know, you have to kind of be like that when you're pushing the envelope, which we said was not bourgeois feminism, not individualistic feminism, not feminism that was for self-aggrandizement or betterment, not feminism to get the next good job, you know, not that kind of feminism. But we really wanted feminism to be the theory and practice, you know, you got to do something too, that would free all women. And that's what we were really trying to do. It was about a social movement. And so that meant that we were writing about it, we were theorizing about it, and some of us were doing it from within the academy. For instance, the book really got started as an idea when Barbara Smith became the first African American woman on the Modern Language Association Commission on the Status of Women in the Profession. And then I came on as a second woman, and doing that book was our project. And so it took off a long way from what it was envisioned for that point. So that was what we were doing. So when I assess the success of the book, whether or not it's lived up to what we were so passionately hoping for it, we have done really, really well in terms of transforming the academy. Because, as Rachel was saying, now universities and colleges advertise for jobs for people to come and be specialists in African American women, women of color. That was unheard of. We were in there doing work that everybody says was not even scholarly work worth doing. So it's totally, totally changed in that way. There's room for us in the academy, and we're doing very well. But then when you look at how much have we really transformed and raised the consciousness of grassroots women as a feminist movement, you know, as a place where the ideas that we become familiar with in the academy translate, take root, and make concrete change, you know, in all women's lives, that we still have a lot of work to do. And there are still essays and pieces and parts of essays in But Some of Us Are Brave that speak to that. So this is a way of saying, looking at what people have called the legacy of Brave got me to thinking about this whole question of the ideas and how we convey them. I decided that one reason for the longevity of the book, the continued relevance of the book, the success of the book, has a lot to do with the fact that we were as concerned with craft and creativity as we were with the message and with the ideas. We did not want to put together just another book. You know, we were very clear that it didn't need to be, and we didn't want it to be, traditional academic writing. We wanted to tell stories. We said we can do something that's non-sanctioned, that's non-traditional. We wanted to seek and find our true, you know, our real voices. We said you don't have to be objective. There's no such thing as that anyway. Be invested. Be personal, be unique, express yourself, tell your stories. Make the writing beautiful, make it poetic. It's okay if you use a metaphor. It's okay if your sentence is musical. It's okay if you're emotional, you know, and you can do the theory by way of poems or journals or conversations or hybrid forms. And one of the pieces that I did in But Some of Us Are Brave, I was writing about Alice Dunbar Nelson, and I tried to pull together some of these ideas so that it could just get said. I said things like, the proper scholarly stance is engaged rather than objective. The personal experience of the subject you're investigating, as well as your own, is political and should be attended to. You have to realize that the work you're doing is not just an intellectual game or an intellectual exercise, but it's something that has real meaning in the real world. It's out there to do something other than to entertain yourself, write an essay, or get somebody else's mind to spin it, even though that might be the first step. We don't want it to stop there. And you have to really, really know and respect your subject. And one of the things that was interesting for us, because we were writing things that pushed us, pushed our friends, pushed our families, pushed our parents, we always said, you have to be willing to have everybody you know read what you write and not do the thing where, I think I said, how did I write this? It was a funny little sentence. Oh, I know. I said, I now include and visualize everybody, my department chair, the promotion and tenure committee, my mother and brother, my Black feminist sisters, the chair of Afro-American Studies, lovers, colleagues, friends, for each organic article, rather than write sneaky, schizophrenic essays from under many different hats. So the idea of having that kind of integrity for the work that you do and trying to not only make it work, because see, the craft part of that is that if you are writing so that your mother and your brother, who probably do something quite different from, feminism in that form, if what you write works for them and speaks to them, you have drawn in bigger audiences and it works for everybody. So it's a way of bridging, making connections. So always from the start, we were very clear about trying to do that kind of work. And it's reflected then in the essays because they continue to, people can read them, they were accessible, and so forth. Many of us who were contributors to that book also did write poetry and short stories and everything, so we were aware of craft and style in that form. We were also, as I said, finding voices. So when you, let me just call your attention to two things. For example, when you read Barbara Smith's work, her essay toward a Black feminist criticism, she has a style where you can just feel and sense her outrage, her disappointment, her disbelief. She can be very caustic and ironic, but she does it in an absolutely intellectual, intelligent, and substantiated way. She will say with sarcasm, and they said, she was talking about a particular white feminist critic, and she said, in order to be legitimate, you definitely cannot be talking about those double non-entities, Black women, So just to use a phrase like that, and I'm thinking about an essay that I would urge all of you to read. It's Michelle Russell's Black Eyed Blues Connections. It's a model for how you would go about and try to teach or do any kind of movement building work with community women. And that's what she was doing. And it's just beautifully written. Michelle she's always been an artist, but now she really is full-time artist, lives in Oaxaca, Mexico, and so forth. But I was reading her essay again, and one of the things she does is just weaves in images and metaphors. And at one point she says, when you go to have a class with these women, remember that they're speeding. She says some are literally on hypertensive medication. Some have chronic high blood pressure. They may be skittish from a street encounter that they had to have just to get to where you are. They just may have had a fight with the partner or whatever. She says, so their experience hangs discordantly about them like bracelets on their arms. So that kind of writing. So I said all of this to say that that's the kind of writing and the kind of consciousness about how to get across a message that makes the book really work. And I wanted to talk about that because it's the kind of work I want to make people here who are doing the work aware of and say, it can be done. It can be done. You can write like that. You can think like that. You can do that. And it will endure, and it will be welcomed, and it will be accepted. So for myself, once I had gone through the process of, one of the things you have to remember, we, the contributors and editors, did the book, but we weren't know-it-alls at that point. We were struggling to pull all of that information and pull everything together and to, come up with what is there. But once I had done that, it then became the way that I was able to do all of my work after that. And I want to just mention, the work on women poets of the Harlem Renaissance. So I knew, I knew that the Harlem Renaissance was important for more than just Langston Hughes, County Cullen, and all of the men, Claude McKay, all of the men who were in the anthologies. So I set out to look at who were these women poets of the Harlem Renaissance. So there's a poem here by Georgia Douglas Johnson, one poem by Angelina Grimke, a little bit of work by Alice Dunbar Nelson, but that's all. So I knew they did more than that. So I really got into researching them archivally and just looking at stuff nobody else had ever looked at. And I didn't know what I was going to find. But what I found is that Alice Dunbar Nelson and Angelina Grimke both had various kinds of relationships with women that were intimate, sexual, emotional, and so forth. And then that's the point at which you have to walk your talk, because there were all kinds of people saying, one of whom was Alice Dunbar Nelson's niece, who had given me, aunt, who had given me access to the work. She said to me, well, we don't have to talk about that, do we? And of course we do have to talk about that, don't we? Yeah, and so once I got it all, then how do you write? How do you talk about that? So the example I'm going to use is Angelina Well Grimke. The Grimke name may be familiar to you because of Sarah Grimke and Angelina Well Grimke, who were two white sisters who lived in Boston during the slavery era in the mid-19th century. They are well known because, unlike most of the people around them of their time, they were staunch abolitionists, really fought the anti-slavery causes, and they were also staunch feminists. They contributed their money, their influence, and their time, and that's what they were doing in Boston. But lo and behold, they had a brother who lived on a South Carolina plantation, who was a slaveholder, who had relations with one of his black slaves and produced two slave sons. Okay, one of those slave sons is the father of Angelina Well Grimke. He married a white woman from a very well-known family in Boston, and Angelina was their child. Okay, so that's her background. Given that, you can imagine how she grew up. You see pictures of her, She's the only little, she was light-skinned, but you could tell she was black. And in photographs of her in school, she's the only little, of color face. She always looks sad. You want to do that because that was a hard life to have. And her mother and her father separated when she was very young, and she didn't get to really know her mother. And so she grew up with a very, very inordinately strong attachment to her father. And that was her life. Okay, so I'm just studying this, and I'm reading all her sad poems and stuff. But then I found out that when she was in school, there were all these notes between her and one of her classmates, and they were very explicit. One of them says, "Oh, if I could only just come to you in the same old sweet way and shower you with kisses," and it goes on like that, and "Oh, I'd love to be your husband," it goes on like that. And then she has these poems where she talks about, she's talking to nature, and she says to nature, oh, I didn't print that part. Okay, she says to nature, to the turtle doves, the birds that are singing, she asked the birds to whisper to her, lines I do not dare, tell her black, gold, red my love is, and for her, for her. So, and then some of these poems, I found them, and they would have the female pronoun, but then she'd scratch that out and then put the male pronoun there. So all of this was the evidence. See, because when you're going to say this woman, was woman identified, or she, had lesbian emotions, everybody's going to say, how do you know that? And I was just happy. See, I was going to say it anyway, but the more proof I got, that made it even better, because there it is. But it also shows you what it was like for her to be who she was at the time and to write and produce. And it also explains why more of her work wasn't published. How could it be? Okay, so when it came time for me to try to write about this woman, Angelina Well Grimke, I wanted to do it in a way that conveyed not just the facts of her life, but also the feeling and the condition and the meaning of her life. And what I want to do is just read you two paragraphs that give you an idea of what I'm talking about when I talk about how we were wanting to write. The question, to repeat it, is, what did it mean to be a black lesbian poet in America at the beginning of the 20th century? First, it meant that you wrote or half wrote in isolation a lot which you did not show and knew you could not publish. It meant that when you did write to be printed, you did so in shackles, chained between the real experience you wanted to say and the conventions that would not give you voice. It meant that you fashioned a few race and nature poems, transliterated lyrics, and double-tongued verses, which sometimes, racism being what it is, got published. It meant, finally, that you stopped writing altogether, dying, no doubt, with your real gifts stifled within, and leaving behind, in a precious few cases, the little that managed to survive of your true self in fugitive pieces. Okay, all right. And I'm playing with the style in that. You can hear it, like when I say you leave behind in a precious few cases, I'm saying cases to mean circumstances, but also those little cases that I found her work in, and and all the chain metaphors and stuff like that, to try to give the feeling for it. And I end this essay where I'm reading from. The book Homegirls? Okay, this is the Angelina Well Grimke essay that I have in Homegirls. And it ends this way. Finally, we are left with the question, what is the meaning of Grimke's life to us? One of her own poems, Under the Days, can serve to preface the answer. And this is Grimke's poem. The days fall upon me. One by one, they fall like leaves. They are black, they are gray, they are white. They are shot through with gold and fire. They fall ceaselessly. They cover me, they crush, they smother. Who will ever find me under the days? Grimke lived a buried life. We research and resurrect, but have to struggle to find and connect with her, for she had no spirit left to send us. Unlike one of her contemporaries, Alice Dunbar Nelson, who saw through adversity to triumph and heartens us even as we weep, Grimke was defeated, flattened, crushed. She is a lesson whose meaning each person will interpret as they see fit and are able. What she says to me is that we must work, write, live, so that who and what she was never has to mean the same again. Okay, so unabashed politicizing, you know, trying to really make it meaningful, you know, that this all has to mean something. So that's the doing feminist work, paying attention to the theory and the creativity and the way you express it. The last thing I want to do as the final part of this talk and reading is to read you some from this novel that I self-published in 2012. It's called NEICY, a novel. It's available on Amazon. There were supposed to be copies here, but the mail really didn't do what they had promised it would be, and they're not here, which I'm sorry to say, because I would have loved to sign for you. But I'm still going to talk about it. I was saying, well, maybe I shouldn't even talk about it, but I'm going to still talk about the book. Because at this point in my life, my needle, my compass can shift even more to being more creative. I've always written poetry and all of that, but now I can just do it, you know. But of course, because of who I am and because of my convictions about the world, about women, about feminism, that's going to always be in everything that I do. And so it's everywhere in the book. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that and read just a few pieces from that. Let's see, is there anything else I need to say before I say that? Oh, I know the other thing I want to say. One of my concerns has always been sex and sexuality. I didn't choose it, so to speak. It kind of chose me, but it knew that I would do right by it because of my own sexual history, my own experience, my own convictions about it. You know, I have been abused. I name myself as a bisexual woman. You know, I'm who I am, and I live my life in that way. So, and I look at the world and think about how much suffering and how much injustice happens because we as a society, or human beings on this globe, don't get it right. We don't know how to handle the complexity of our sexuality and who we really are. And every minute or two, you look around and you see evidence of that. all over the world. And in this world, I just happened to have turned on the television this morning. Who's the athlete who they just found had spent $75,000 to have two women at a Las Vegas so-called love? Yes. Entertain him for 5 days. You know, the Pope is still dealing with the scandals of the church. Politicians never get it right. I remember in Soul Talk, my book, I have a little piece in there where I go off talking about what Bill Clinton should have done when he got caught in the Monica Lewinsky scandal. He and Hillary were running a really progressive White House in a certain kind of way. They were having all kinds of New Age speakers there. They were having all kinds of different people. You know, they were doing different things. I mean, they were doing some wrong things too, but they were trying to do that too. But when he could no longer deny the Monica Lewinsky stuff, he got very, very traditional. He went into pastoral counseling. You know, they shut down the White House from all the radical stuff. You know, everything got like that. But and so I write in Soul Talk how wonderful it would have been if he had modeled a way of dealing with infidelity in a way that began to help people to deal with it. It's like, it's really hard to be monogamous. I don't care who you are, you know. It's really hard to be principled and truthful. How do you have relationships where you can honor the feelings you have for everybody, but yet not be a liar or be a cheat or be, you know, all of these are really big questions and everybody's grappling with it. How can you be who you are sexually? I mean, we talk about that in various ways. We talk about it in terms of acting on whatever impulses you have, but it also is a part of how do you do relationships, you know, and it has a lot to do with what kind of person you are in the world, because when you're not clear to be who you are and integrous in that way, it's going to show. You know, it's going to show in your dealings with everybody, with your children. You know, it's going to show in your work. You know, so, and we won't even get to what it looks like on a global scale. You know, trafficking in women, you know, international prostitution, you know, and I remember an essay I saw, I think it was in the Times, about ISIS fighters kneeling and praying beside the beds of Syrian women before they raped them. You know, just, it's all, you know what I'm saying? We really don't have that right. So I'm not going to set it right myself, you know, alone, but I know it's one of my concerns, and so that's why it shows up as much as it does in my work and in this particular book, even though here it's played out in the experience of this one African-American woman named classically NEICY. Okay, so I'm just gonna, I think I'm losing track of time. I have about 10 minutes left, maybe. Go, okay. Okay, all right, so maybe I can't read, okay, I'll just read a little. Okay, I'll read the beginning. I'll read some of the beginning, and then I'll read something else. Okay, the book spans a long period of time, and it starts off in the late 50s. So this is in the late 50s part. 2-year-old NEICY is playing alone on the scarred tile floor of the women's workhouse bathroom in Little Rock, Arkansas. I have to interrupt myself to say, I set this part of the book in Little Rock, Arkansas, long before I knew that I would end up living there. It's just one of those things. I'd never set foot in Arkansas before, but then that's where I decided she was going to grow up. Be real careful. So I'll start over. 2-year-old NEICY is playing alone on the scarred tile floor of the women's workhouse bathroom in Little Rock, Arkansas. She runs her tiny, sharp nails through the grimy buildup between the blocks, watching these grayish shavings add their pattern to the streaks in the faded brown squares. She tires and looks around. Her gaze wavers in the early morning light, then bounces off the bleak green walls and dissolves through the window pane dappled with dirt, its top half turned down just enough to blow in a cup of cold air. She shivers, and her hungry stomach begins to growl. "Mama," she calls. "Mama, Mama." She calls for her mother. Her mother says, "Mama's coming, sweetie, hold your horses." Her mother is, in fact, in one of the bathroom stalls with a man having sex. And NEICY decides she's going to crawl under that stall and pull the hem of her mother's dress. Then she backs away from that and then goes to another stall. She crawls a few more steps until she bumps against the crook-neck cold of the toilet in the adjacent stall. She could stand up if she wanted, but there are more things to see on the floor than from 2.5 feet above it, like a bubble of old stuff, which she brings to her mouth, scratching and tasting, squiggling and eating as she sits back on her thin, strong haunches. "NEICY, NEICY, baby, where are you?" her mother calls. Her big dark eyes rolled around the long, narrow room. The tall man bends over behind her, shaking out the cuffs of his pants and tying his shoe. "There she is," he says, standing up and pointing his finger. Her mother jumped like she had been shot and lifts her child up off the floor, folding her to her breast. "What's that you into, sweetie?" Her voice lost its blurred edges, and her eyes got focused. She moved real fast toward the water faucet, digging in her pocket for the cloth she had just finished wiping her own self with, screwing a lousy bastard to get little NEICY some extra milk. The man spat, "Niggas," then turned and walked away. At the door, he looked over his shoulder and said, "Get on back to your room before I make the rounds." "You slimy motherfucker," she breathed, cursing the air he left behind. So that's a rough beginning to NEICY's life. And of course, I'm talking about definitely exploitative sex based on race, class, incarceration, and all the rest of it. So that's the beginning of her life. She goes on, she is sexually molested by first a man and then a woman who is still like, see how things can be complex. She's a woman who loves her, but yet she uses her in a way that is not sexually appropriate. When she's a little girl of 4 or 5 years old. And NEICY does not consciously remember any of this. She grows up, and like we learned, one of the things we did at UC Santa Cruz was talk a lot about those experiences we women had as children that we didn't remember, and they still were in our bodies and in our psyches. But I decided not to make this a classic case of recovering memory. I let NEICY never consciously remember any of those things that happened to her, but she acts out of them all of her life. She grows up to become an actress, and she actually almost loses jobs because in one instance, she needed to sit on a man's lap and knee, and she couldn't because that was how she was molested by the man who molested her. And she has a lesbian relationship, and she is attracted to that woman when they are both in a situation that recalls some of the intimacies that she did with the woman. You see, so the echoes. So that's part of the fun of writing the book, and it's part of making that statement and of doing something a little bit different. But she grows up, but she also does really good work, and she is always trying to communicate what she's learned. And one of the things, I have a little scene in here, I'll read to you. One of the things that she does is she does work with young African American women when she can. And because she's an actress, she tries to get them to, think about how they carry themselves, what's the right way to do that, how they look, who are their models, and so forth. And so here, she's in Philadelphia, which is where the next part of the book takes place. And she's working with these groups of women at her friend's church. And this is what they're doing. And I throw in little things like this because just like with the Michelle Gibbs essay, it's like, so how do you work with people like that? So there's a long scene where I really talk about how she's working with those women. But then in this particular part here, this is shorter because it also gets at other things. In the afternoon session, the girls got right into their introduction, likewise slinging long hair. She had told them to walk a certain way gracefully and then do this and then do that. But every time they got to the point where they did this, they all flung their hair. So she wanted to know, since they were all black women, why they were flinging their hair. Okay. When she asked them why they did it, they told her they didn't want to hear anything else about how they should stop trying to be white women. They had talked about that during the morning. They had white friends and knew white girls were okay. Why do you all sound like you hate white women? A prim girl dressed for church asked. Yeah, one young woman, smoothing her brow with a red fingernail, added loudly. My grandmother told me that anybody who goes around making a job out of disliking white people doesn't love their own self. What? Has she heard that right? The girl repeated herself in the same exact words. And NEICY says, but we're not talking about disliking or hating white people, she argued. We're talking about affirming our own brand of beauty, about not buying into the media images of how a woman is supposed to look in order to be attractive, which usually means a white female pattern. Not all the time. The girls named a few singers and supermodels. NEICY says, those fall into another category that shows something else. Black women being made into super sexual or exotic creatures. All the hair lets everybody know they're hot. Well, I don't care. The pert girl speaking tossed her head. Hair or no hair, my boyfriend thinks I'm sexy, and I still want to be Tina Turner when I grow up. So at that point, NEICY lets it alone, but it's those kind of issues that, are still there. And so there are parts that go on and talk about that a little more, but I like what happens with NEICY after this because it gets her to doing some introspection about how she has done her politics and what she knows. She stood in the room and she repeats, anybody who goes around making a job out of disliking white people doesn't love their own self. Anybody black. The black was understood. She hadn't made a job of disliking whites, but it hit her that beating up on them did make her feel hip and morally superior. And yes, the only reason she would need that was not feeling good enough about herself in the first place. The thought was so revolutionary, she dropped into one of the nursery school chairs, her legs flowing over the floor. While putting adversarial energy into white people, what in her own self was she neglecting, not looking at, escaping from, and would using race in this way, as she'd certainly done with Chris, keep her distance and unconnected? She didn't like what this said about her. This was not who she wanted to be. She most definitely needed to get her head straight on the subject. So little things like that are all in the book. And the last thing I want to tell you about it is I hit on that whole question of how do you have or not have relationships with all the people with whom you're attracted in a relationship that NEICY has with a man named Curtis, who I do not intend to be a villain, even though many black women who read this book, and many white women who read this book, want to make him out to be a villain. And I always confess that if I were going to be a black man, I think I would probably be a Curtis. But I mean, he's really I mean, if you read the book, you'll see what I'm talking about. Curtis, I don't mean him to be a villain, but he is really trying to figure out. He ends up being non-monogamous, of course, but he's trying to figure out how to do it honestly, you know. And so that's the challenge. So she goes through that relationship, and I was going to read you a part about her and Curtis, but I don't have time to do that. But she finally comes to a crisis in her life where she's able to look back at how she's behaved sexually and in her relationships, and she remembers why she's been promiscuous. She remembers the scarring that she had when she wasn't the nice girl that her little boyfriend walked home from mass, but he would see her whenever he wanted to have fun. You know, she remembers all these things. She remembers how she almost got raped in college because her date kept saying, well, you've done it with other people, why don't you give me some? You know, she remembers all of these things, and she's trying to figure out what to do. And that sends her on a journey to Houston again. I don't know why Houston was where I had her go at the end. But the last part of the book is set in Houston. No, it's true. It's set in Little Rock, Philadelphia, and Houston. And she goes to her stepfather, who's a really wonderful black guy. This is my favorite part of the book. And with him, she begins to look back over her life and begins to finally figure out how to pull it all together based on and using a lot of his wisdom. So thank you for listening to that, and thank you for letting me share it.
Right. I just was curious if you had a recommendation for a piece of nonfiction literature around how modern homes and facilities for women coming from abusive relationships, and how they develop their programming, or who decides that. Does that make sense?
Okay. You are.
I don't really like
you're
battered women's shelters.
Yeah. You're positing that there are homes for women who have been sexually abused as children or come from abusive relationships as grown-ups.
Right. I'm asking if there's any nonfiction literature you'd recommend that discusses how those facilities decide how to treat those women, or how what the programming is, how they're set up.
Yeah.
Usually people live there.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I actually don't know that. Is there anybody here who knows? Somebody here might know about homes, facilities for abused women, and what their programs are, how they set the homes up to serve the needs of the women, or something she can read that will help her with that?
The Houston Area Women's Center on Waugh Drive has been there for a long time, and they specifically do work with battered women and find alternative living for them and give counseling. So that would be a beginning. They have everything there, and it's the Houston Area Women's Center on Waugh. So that could be a beginning.
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. Uh-huh.
Oh, that's kind of loud.
Hello.
Hi, I'm Tonisha Taylor, professor at Prairie View A&M. And in answer to your question, actually, Kimberly Crenshaw has a little red report actually on women's shelters programming in Los Angeles County. And I don't know that it was published outside of LA County, to tell you the honest to goodness truth. But it's on the programming that happens and how that programming, I think it actually focuses on how the programming is funded, if I remember the report correctly. But there's that's possible to look at. And then as a comment, I just wanted to thank you, Dr. Hull, for your book and for editing this collection and coming and reading about it, it's one of those things I think often we think of these collections as something that has an impact on people, but then we don't get a chance to find out the impact it has on the person that created it. And so it was really exciting to be here and hear you call the names of the scholars and women and friends, department heads and others that you worked with, but also wrote for. And so I really am thankful for that.
Thank you so much for saying that. There's somebody over there. Those people at the back also had their hands up.
Nick, go ahead.
Hi, my name's Nick.
I need you to raise your hand so I can see who's talking. Okay, great.
At what point did you know that your work would have such an impact on Black women in the Academy and have such an impact on the Academy? And how did that knowledge impact how you positioned yourself in the Academy?
Okay. Okay. It was having an impact. Okay, I know how I can answer that. I began to get a sense of it being something important as early as, I can tell you exactly, 1974. I was at the Modern Language Association annual convention in New York City. It's, I don't know, it probably still is the largest professional association. It's of teachers of English and literature in colleges and universities in the country. I was walking the halls trying to find something relevant to myself. That's when I met Barbara Smith, who was also walking the halls trying to find, other sisters, and we, from that point, began to find all of us who were walking, trying to find something. And so we had our own sessions in each other's hotel rooms, and that's how I met Michelle Russell and, Mary Helen Washington, and it went on like that. At that point, I knew that it was an impact for us and that what we were talking about and wanting to do could have impact on the Academy. And then once we started reaching out, who's teaching Black women writers? Now remember, this is before people taught Black women writers. We connected with Alice Walker, and that's how, with Alice Walker and the Feminist Press, that book, I Love Myself When I Am Laughing and Then Again When I Am Looking Mean and Impressive, the Zora Neale Hurston Reader. At that point, we were flaunting copyright and Xeroxing Their Eyes Were Watching God so that we could have students in our classes read it. Can you believe that? And now I just read something about they're getting ready to do this big women's history museum in New York City that's going to take, and they're going to have Zora Neale Hurston in it. I mean, she's like a household name now, but this is before anybody knew her. So when we began to do that kind of thing, and that's when I knew, and it was always having an impact on me. Make sense?
Hello, greetings. How you doing? My name is Boosie Petersburg,
Hi.
and I want to appreciate what you shared. But it's so much that you shared that I don't know. There's so many things I would like to share. But one, what I wanted to ask, I'm the CEO and founder of a 501c3 called WOO, Women Healing and Empowering Women.
Okay, I need you to say that last sentence again. There's something about the mic that makes the words run together, and I have to hear them.
Can you hear me better?
I can hear you now.
Okay, so I'm the CEO and founder of WOO, Women Healing and Empowering Women.
Okay.
It's a reentry program addressing the fact that women of color have been outpacing our men going to prison and looking at intersection issues such as domestic violence and homelessness. What we found is that the root of women in prison is sexual abuse, molestation, things of that nature. Mm-hmm. And over the years, through the work that we've been doing, looking at relationships and how it's at the root of women in prison, we have come to look at the United States and what made the United States. When you talk about sexuality, I wanted to throw into the pocket, especially with what's going on today, with all the issues around people of African descent and police brutality and things of that nature, the prison industrial complex, and looking at sexuality and the fact that this country was built off of the sexuality of African people
Yes.
who were forced to have sex with each other
Yes.
without consent. And the
Yes.
same with the other indigenous people, that's what built this country. So has there been much work around that, around historically the sexual abuse of indigenous people of this country and how it has affected the fallout of that and the way it's played out?
Well, I'm going to tell you something. If I were anywhere in this city, I would have you be the next speaker. No, I'm not kidding. I would have you be the next speaker because that's the kind of work that needs to be done. That's the kind of, all of that, every way you showed all those intersections and those causes, that's the work being done at a level at which it will impact so many women's lives who may never show up in a women's studies classroom, you know? And if you wrote about that, then it would be an essay that somebody like this woman here could use to help her with what she's doing in terms of how do you design programs that are going to really be effective for those women who need the effect. And at the same time you're doing that work, those women are getting how to change their minds and change their actions and change. You know, it's just transformative in all the ways we need it and branches out in so many ways. So I just want to applaud you for standing up and telling us and sharing with us what you said. Oh, and can I just ask something? Like, do you do work or make connections with women at University of Houston or Texas Southern? I know you have to stay where you are to do what you do, but are there connections that can be made?
Yes, a matter of fact, what we do is we do town halls and we do conferences, and we did our town hall here at the campus of U of H, as well as at TSU as well.
Okay.
So I did both.
Okay, and to get support and to have the flow be mutual.
Yes.
Yes.
You see, the subject matter is so heavy
Yes.
that a lot of people don't want to deal with it. And see, my issue with academia is that we want to come out and we want, I enjoy the sandwiches and the drinks and everything. It's wonderful to come and pontificate, But the reality is we're dying.
Yeah.
We're dying out here.
Yeah.
And, I just got off the phone with a friend of mine who's a white brother, and I love him dearly because he is having the self-analysis. He does the work, thinking about as a spirit, as a human being, because we're dealing with constructs. There's no such thing as race. There's no such thing as all these things that they've cause us to have problems in terms of relationships. But that's the work that we're working on. We're working on looking at relationships and how does it affect our lives. You get your degrees, hey, I have a master's, I want to get my PhD as well. But how is that going to change the quality of life for us out here? So, it's great to get your degrees and eat well, but it gets to be selfish and elitist when only some of us are living a certain quality of life to just talk about the problems as opposed to what are we going to do to change it.
That's exactly the point, and that was what we really wanted.
Thank you so much
with some of us
for allowing me to share.
Yeah, oh yeah, thank you for sharing.
Okay.
Is this the last? We can take this as the last one because if any of you bought Braves or bought your old copies of Braves, I want to be able to sign them for you if you would like.
So I actually just wanted to hear you talk a little bit about creativity as a space for feminist thought production. So you wrote a novel that encompasses a lot of topics that like Black feminist theorists have been discussing for years, and it's a way, in my mind, to allow like more people. Like, so I teach a literature class for high school students, and we read literature as a way of understanding feminist concepts, because reading Butler may not work for a 17-year-old, right? So I wanted to ask you about like your decision to write creatively versus writing a theoretical essay.
Yeah, well, as I think I mentioned in passing, I've always done the creative writing. For many of us who were a part of Combahee River Collective, or just trying to do Black feminist work, organizing and Black feminist work in general, for those of us who were editors and contributors but some of us are brave, it's like the movement work, the theorizing, the idea work on the one hand, and the creative urge were twin uprisings. And so with all of the stuff in us that needed to be said, it's like, okay, let's get it out. And that just fed and was the creativity. And I think that's how a lot of it works, when you're really in touch with things that you feel or just absolutely essential and important. They come to you in all kinds of forms. But what you do have to do is be willing to let it, to be willing to have it happen, and to nurture it and give it space. And sometimes it really helps a lot to have a community of like-minded souls and spirits that can help you and support you. And then you have to be able to know how to carve out and keep the space to do that work. And so the best thing is just to be encouraged to do it. And that's my last thing. I have this one piece of paper that says conclusions. Okay, what I wrote on this piece of paper that says conclusions is, okay, what did I write? Oh, in my opinion, whatever the genre, ideal feminist work is a mixture of ideas, theory, and creativity craft style. And it is necessary for optimum, impactful expression. So, regardless of discipline, craft your theory and theorize your craft. And have it all be for a passionate purpose, one that will hopefully help create a better, happier world for everything and everybody on the planet.